My name is Tom Matzzie. I'm Washington Director for MoveOn.org. I'm very happy to be here with our panelists who are all playing a significant role, a major role in the debate over the war in Iraq. I want to thank the Campaign for America's Future. Once upon a time, I was an employee of the Campaign for America's Future. I was actually the second person ever hired by the Campaign for America's Future back in the late 90s, and worked then to organize a coalition to stop Social Security privatization. And so Roger Hickey and Bob Borsage and all the Campaign for America's Future folks are someone who, there are people who I have a great deal of respect for, as I know you do. 4 years after the invasion of Iraq, now into our 5th year, and more than 3,500 American soldiers dead. Tens of thousands of American soldiers wounded. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis killed. By all estimates, there are more than 2 million refugees who have left Iraq. And there are more than 2 million Iraqis who have lost their homes inside Iraq. And after $500 billion of American tax dollars, we still face a war without end in Iraq. And that is the Bush policy, endless war. But there is hope on the horizon because of the organizing work of people up here and millions of Americans across the country. On this panel, we're going to be discussing out of Iraq, and I'm going to turn to our panelists to carry the bulk of this. My role will be as a moderator. But I wanted to share one big piece of news with you. Right now, out near Baltimore, Maryland, there are more than 90 organizers who are going through a training for what is being called Iraq Summer, a campaign to end the war. They're being trained in volunteer organizing, or how to work with the media, how to organize within congressional districts all across the country. And tomorrow they'll be deployed to more than 15 states to go after 40 targets, 9 senators and 31 members of Congress, with the goal in the next 90 days, before magical September, of changing the position of these targets on the war and moving them to support an exit plan that will get our troops out of Iraq. But I'm really honored to first introduce a champion for peace and justice, somebody who has been working tirelessly to end the war. And let me say, as someone who directs MoveOn's Iraq campaign, I know she works every day to end the war. Congresswoman Barbara Lee is co-chair of the Out of Iraq Caucus, one of the founders. And the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. She represents Berkeley, California, and was elected to the seat once held by Ron Dellums in 1998, carrying on tradition for that seat. She's a member of the Appropriations Committee and spent several years on the International Relations Committee on the House. So she is skilled on these matters of international affairs and foreign policy, in addition to being passionate about them. And so I'm very happy to welcome Congresswoman Barbara Lee to the podium here today. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. Let me just say how great it is to see you here, to be with you, and to really be committed with your lives each and every day to end this occupation in Iraq and to bring our young men and women home. Because of you, we're going to do that. And let me just thank Bob Borsage, and let me thank you also, Tom, for your leadership and for for your diligence in making sure that we can regain our democracy. I supposed to say keeping our democracy alive and regain it. And also I want to thank you for really harnessing the hope that exists out there at the grassroots level and challenging all of our hopes into a progressive movement for change. That's what time is. So give time and move on, and all of our organizations who are doing this on the and to our panelists, I'm looking forward to listening to you, and thank you all very much for your commitment and your dedication and your leadership. Again, this is a time that we all have to come together, and I believe that we will win. It's just a matter of time. But it's going to be up, again, to you to help us make sure that we get out of this mess and get out of it quickly. The theme for this session, of course, is out of Iraq, what next? And that is a question that's on your mind, it's on my mind, it's on our panelists' mind, it's on everyone's mind these days. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Congresswoman Lynn Woolsey, myself, give the triad, that's what we call it. Maxine and Lynn, day and night, are on the case. And I tell you, it is an uphill battle oftentimes in the Congress, but I think we're winning. And I think we're winning because of people like you, of the country, who really understands that those of us on the inside who are fighting so hard to end this occupation, that it is because of you we're able to do any of the things that we can do on the inside. And so Maxine and Lynn, I know, are participating in this conference, but just know they are champions for justice, they're champions for peace. First of all, over at the White House, you know, we say what's next in terms of out of Iraq. Well, on their mind, what's next is more of the same lying and stalling and playing politics with people's lives that got us into this mess in the first place. Now that was stopped, but that's what's going on over the White House. That was stopped. Many of you remember our efforts to prevent permanent military bases in Iraq. Of course, we were able, because of you lobbying and pushing your members of Congress, we were able to include that in the Defense Appropriations Bill, all the supplemental bills, all the authorization bills. So it's really the law of the land. But the administration really, again, talk about deceiving the American people. They say they had no intentions of establishing permanent military bases in Iraq. Now they're not even trying to pretend that they're committed to that. The latest to come out of the White House is, remember a couple weeks ago, the Korea model. They want to extend the military occupation for another 50 years. That's what's next on their mind and on their agenda. You're going to hear a lot about Baker Hamilton. And you're going to hear some vague proposals that may bring some troops home, but may not bring others. In the House, we may see a vote on deauthorizing the war, and we should vote on deauthorizing the war. It would also give a good opportunity for those who voted to authorize the invasion and occupation to set the record straight and atone for that mistake. And of course, how do you fund something that has been deauthorized? So for many of us, the question of what's next is really not a theoretical question, though. This is a moral question. It's an ethical question that really requires, though, political action. And the answer is clear. The occupation of Iraq must end, and we're going to have to end it. It's up to us to end it. Right? We're going to have to end it. The president is not going to end this occupation. Congress must end it. The people's house must end it. Today, let me just talk to you briefly about how we should go about doing that. because we're going to need the help of every person in this room and everybody at this conference. And I believe most of us are on the same page on this panel, and most of us are coming together with this one position. Congress needs to fully fund withdrawal. What I'm talking about is clear and simple. It's a plan for Congress to end the occupation of Iraq and bring our troops home as quickly as possible. And what is fully funding? The proposal is very simple. Congress appropriates the funds necessary to do two things: to protect our troops and to bring them home. We'll vote for funding to do that, but for nothing else. That's what we should do. Now, several months ago, when the supplemental was being debated, we introduced the Lee Amendment. You may have heard of the Lee Amendment, but these were some of the goals. We tried to get a debate on the floor, but we didn't quite manage that time, but we're still moving forward. But let me tell you what the Lee Amendment did. First, to complete the withdrawal, the funding, the $100 billion, for the withdrawal of all U.S. forces and military contractors. Military contractors. Yeah. And secondly, of course, to provide for the protection of those forces and contractors during that withdrawal. And we made it clear that while our measure would effectively end our military occupation of Iraq, it would not prohibit or restrict funds from being used for diplomatic efforts or reconstruction. We bombed the heck out of Iraq, we created havoc and conditions for the civil war that is occurring, and we occupied that country. And so we do have a moral responsibility to help with reconstruction efforts and help the Iraqi people put their lives back together again. We have a responsibility. But under the Lee Amendment, we would not allow any money for this escalation. No money at all. None. Also, no money for making our young men and women referee an Iraqi civil war. No money for that. No price. Fully funded withdrawal means using our constitutionally mandated power of the purse to end the president's failed policy in Iraq. It means that Congress must say, Mr. President, you can have as much money as you need, provided it is spent on two things: protect our troops and bring them home as safely and quickly as possible. That's what we want to do, and that's what our funding should be used for. But what happens if Bush vetoes our proposal for fully funded withdrawal? He can't argue that Congress is withholding funds from troops in harm's way. The only reason for our troops being in harm's way would be because he vetoed the funding to bring them home. Got it? Yeah. Don't let anybody confuse it. It's worth taking a moment to explain what fully funding withdrawal is not. Fully funded withdrawal is not cutting off funding for our troops. And if there are any reporters here, you may want to write that down. Write that down. Don't let them fool you. The Bush administration is going to tell you that it is only about cutting off funding. They want the public to believe that the only way Congress can end the occupation in Iraq is to cut off funding from our troops. And they're going to paint all kinds of scary pictures, which they're doing, of troops in harm's way running out of food and bullets because Congress won't fund it. We know better. So don't let them fool the public anymore. We have to push back against this administration's misinformation. When we first introduced the Lee Amendment for fully funded withdrawal, one of the nation's foremost wire services, and I won't say which one, literally described it as a proposal to cut off funding for the troops. for their food, for their shelter. Come on. You know, even some Democrats actually thought that's what we wanted to do.
Joe Biden.
The stage is set. No, we have another shot at this. The stage is set for another showdown over funding in September. We must win. But we must use the next 3 months to build support for fully funding withdrawal and to put the administration's myth about cutting off funding to rest. That's going to take a lot of work, but I want to thank you, Tom, for organizing and having the 90 people really out there trying to make sure that they're educating members of Congress with regard to how we can end this occupation and civil war. We've got a lot of work to do, though. We have a lot of organizing and public education to do. We're going to have to explain how Congress provides the funds to safely bring our troops and contractors home, how that does not mean we're cutting off funding for our troops. And I keep saying this because I want you all to really be clear on what we have been trying to say and trying to do on the Hill. By the time September arrives, we need to make sure that every man, woman, and child in this nation understands that Congress is taking up a decision between ending a failed policy in Iraq or continuing with that failed policy indefinitely. Those are the only two choices we have. The only two choices. The only two. We have to communicate. Nothing in between. We need to make sure that it is a decision between fully funding withdrawal or providing a blank check for an endless occupation. Those are the two decisions that have to be made in September. And I'm telling you, the heat is on. And the people who are supporting the occupation are feeling it, thanks to you. Thanks to you. They're feeling it. And I know that this summer's organizations like Move On and all of you are going to really make their lives miserable. And you should make them miserable. And they are going to want the pressure really to stop. They're going to want it to stop. And pretty soon there may be enough of them, so they may try to put together a proposal to take the pressure off and not to end the occupation. Something that brings our troops home, but maybe leaves the rest of them indefinitely. You know, some kind of a political half measure. But do you trust people like that to end the occupation of Iraq? So don't go for any half measures at this point. It's long overdue to be. So you must define the debate in September. We cannot afford to leave it to people who see this as a strictly political problem and not a moral issue. And that's why the next 3 months are so important. The showdown in September is not going to be determined in September. It's going to be determined by the work that we do that define what happens in September between now and September. And that is up to you and it is up to me. So I'm asking you for your support in building the campaign to fully fund withdrawal. I'm asking you, so can I count on you to help spread the word? Yeah. Write letters to the editor. Yeah. Can I count on you to help in holding the media accountable and stop the stop repeating the administration's talking points? Can I count on you for that? Yeah. And finally, I must ask you this question. Can I count on you to talk to your members of Congress and make sure that they support fully funded withdrawal in September?
Thank you, Congresswoman. And she's absolutely right. This summer is the critical time for Americans to speak out. And let me make something perfectly clear. We have to offer, this is a moral issue, but we have to offer the politicians who are obstructing an end to the war one choice. You can help us end the war, or you can face political extinction. That's it. Our next speaker is somebody who I look to for counsel on what's going on inside Iraq. He's a close student of Iraq. He has been to Iraq. He lived for 5 years in the Middle East. Brian Katulis is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. He was one of the authors 2 years ago now, just about 2 years ago, of their plan calling for American troops to be out of Iraq. In fact, if Congress had, the President had adopted their plan at that time, all American troops would be out of Iraq on this date. The Strategic Redeployment Plan gave members of Congress who aren't quite as strong champions of peace as Congresswoman Barbara Lee is a way to be for getting out of Iraq, and it became an important part of the Democratic platform in 2006. And so I'm very happy to welcome Brian Katulis.
Congresswoman is a tough act to follow. I don't know if I'll get you on your feet cheering, saying, please read my 70-page policy paper. But I'll do my best. I really, it's gratifying to be here and really an honor to be in the room to talk about a couple of issues, but focus on one in particular. Tom mentioned about 2 years ago I co-authored a report called Strategic Redeployment, which Congressman Murtha and a few others took up key elements of it. And I think it was a key focusing moment for us. I co-wrote it with a former Reagan administration official, a dear colleague of mine, Larry Korb, who served in the Department of Defense. We have been ruminating over Iraq throughout the last couple of years, talking closely with people in Iraq, with Iraqis, closely following the situation, and we're about to release an update of the strategy. And I want to focus on one particular point and one thing that the Congresswoman said. You're going to hear a lot of proposals out there. You're going to hear a lot of it, which at the end of the day is about stalling. I think stalling is one of the words that you used. It really struck me because in some ways, if you read the plan that we put out in 2005 and 2006, you could argue, well, it was just about stalling. And I think increasingly as we look at the situation and as we talk to Iraqis, that we need to get out of Iraq within a year as soon as practically possible. And one of the main points I want to focus on today, connected to bringing an end to the war in Iraq, is one of the arguments that you might hear for why we've got to stay, why we've got to keep 30 or 40,000 troops there. And you hear this at certain think tanks when you go around town. In fact, right at this moment, there is a session that involves some people who consider themselves progressives and left of center, which essentially will be talking about why we need to give weapons and training to Iraq's security forces. And if I have one message for you today, it is to question that assumption and to actually say, you know, that particular point is not only a moral question, as the Congresswoman talked about, it is a national security question. And it is a mistake that we've made in other similar instances where we make alliances of convenience with individuals or with groups that are on our side this month, but in the end of the day, it comes back and blows back up in our face. So one key component... One key component of this new plan, which we're calling strategic realignment, when I was talking with my boss, John Podesta, about what we might call it, I was joking. I said we should call it Control, Alt, Delete. Towards a post-Bush, Iraq, and Middle East strategy.
You're funny, too.
Well, it actually, I was working on this report really late at night. My computer froze up, and I thought, this is just like Iraq. And it's just like the Middle East, and we've got to reboot. We really have to reboot. And if you have a chance to see the report, it'll be out later next week. It's pretty extensive, again, 70 pages. I don't expect you to read all of it. A lot of it talks about the regional context, and the context of Iraq, because Iraq truly is involved not only in just one civil war, but multiple civil wars. Different conflicts in the south, Shiite on Shiite conflicts. Sunnis are killing Shiites. In the north, tensions between Arabs and Kurds. And what really is at stake here is a fundamentally different conception among Iraqis of what Iraq is and should be. It is a bitter struggle for power, and I would submit that our staying there continues to perpetuate this bitter struggle for power. And the reason why I'm focusing on the training and arming of the security forces is because it has become, when you talk about a plan B, moving beyond the surge and things like this in the political and policy realm, a lot of people are just saying, well, this is the best that we can do. You know, the security forces is the glue that will keep Humpty Dumpty together. And what we're saying essentially is we should not get involved in multiple civil wars for a couple of reasons. First of all, giving more weapons to the combatants in these internal conflicts risks making the civil wars even more vicious in 2009 and 2010. And this is a situation where we're putting a cart before the horse, where there's no common vision within Iraq's so-called national unity government about what Iraq is or should be. It does not make sense to arm up different sides in that war. Second, if you look at some of the people that we're giving weapons to, and you saw if you read the Washington Post this morning, these are the sorts of people that I thought we were supposed to be fighting against in some sense. And there's this strategic confusion that I think exists at the heart of not only our Iraq policy, but in the Middle East. And I think if you look back, and when historians look back on this last 7-year period in the Middle East, I think you could argue that we've had 7 years of lean that were preceded by relative years of progress, if you will, or at least hope. I mean, when you look at the events in Gaza and Lebanon and other places, the region really is afire, and simply staying the course, simply saying that we've got to stay in Iraq to train up Iraq's security forces without asking the big question, are we actually creating a national army for a government that doesn't exist, that lacks the support of its very own members? And I think that's one thing that we need to talk about. And I think that's the thing to focus on. Because you hear arguments from our side that'll say we've got to stay there just to get it a little bit right and get it a little bit better. It's over. You hear a lot of these arguments, in a sense, from the people who actually advocated for the war. You know, initially they were the ones who said there's weapons of mass destruction and things like this. And it's amazing because I think sometimes Washington is a game of musical chairs where nobody removes the chairs. And the same commentators, the same analysts, the same... I'm going to close it there because I'm trying, when this report comes out, and we previewed some elements of it on our website, americanprogress.org, but we really, once it's out, we're there as a resource. We're there questioning the conventional wisdom, because in some ways I felt like in 2005 and 2006, we were stuck still, and we couldn't accept reality. And at the core of what we're trying to argue in this policy paper is we've got to accept reality. We're still a great country. We can still do a lot of good. But simply focusing on military solutions to problems that essentially have political and diplomatic solutions does our country no good, does not make our country more safe. And that's all I have to say. So thank you.
We're just taking a brief minute here to set up the screen here. But I wanted to thank Brian. I want everyone to understand the importance of what Brian is saying. There has been a kind of consensus in the foreign policy community, both in Democratic and Republican politics, that even if we left Iraq, we would leave tens of thousands of Americans behind to train the Iraqi army and police. What Brian is saying is laying out a critique that the medicine is killing the patient. That arming the Iraqis during their own civil war, let's be frank about this, arming Iraqis who are participating in ethnic cleansing. The American government is providing arms to a government in Iraq that is either implicitly or explicitly participating in ethnic cleansing. Don't take my word for it. It's on page 9 of the Iraq Study Group report. So this is an important shift in the foreign policy thinking, and that is a big credit to Brian and all the work done at the center. And I should say, when the report comes out, it should be very educational about a lot of the things that have been going on inside Iraq. Our next speaker, who I'm very pleased to introduce, is an Iraq veteran. We've heard from the congressional, yes, that's right. We've heard from the congressional perspective. We've heard from a policy expert. Now it's time to hear something from somebody who's been in Iraq in the conflict. He's also someone who has, over the last year, spoken out and pointed at the politicians and said, "You can't do what you've been doing, or you're going to be held accountable." And that takes a tremendous amount of courage in American politics to stand up on your own, take the first step, start an organization that holds the politicians accountable. John Soltz, Captain Soltz, I cannot, he's out of the Army now, so served in Iraq. He also served before that as a tank platoon commander in Kosovo, which is a different mission. And John now is the national chair of VoteVets.org. Many of you have followed the work of VoteVets during the last election. They ran millions of dollars in ads holding politicians accountable, and I would say they're responsible for a couple of seats. I know, having watched and worked very closely in all the House races last year, there are a couple seats out there that VoteVets.org played the role in switching from red to blue. And so I want to welcome John Soltz.
That's about the warmest welcome I've gotten since I returned home. It's a lot better than when George Bush was a veteran hospital. I don't think that Republicans stand up for the troops, and they surely don't stand up when you talk. No. It's great to speak in front of a group here that I can honestly say is actually the only side of the American political spectrum right now that's fighting not just for our troops in Iraq, but the veterans when they come home. Sometimes I say things I shouldn't say, but George Bush is just too cheap to take care of the vets. That's why you have the front page of the Washington Post today and yesterday and Walter. Tom didn't tell you that I might raise a lot of money and I might come up with some great messages, but he's the one that tells me how to spend it. And Brian, I didn't know you were so fun. I wish I could get control of the league on George Bush. Well, I wanted to talk serious for a second. We'll try to show you all some commercials. I don't do computers, so we're going to try. But a lot of people ask about VoteVets and what we do, so the easiest thing for me sometimes is to show you our work. Like Tom said, though, I am an Iraq War veteran. I served in Iraq in 2003 and in Kosovo in 2000. I like to do this every time. I know I saw Dick Class over here from VetPack somewhere. Where are all the veterans at? Can y'all stand up for us? Stand up. I do this every time because, see, going to Iraq was the easy part. Because I believed in everything that I was told, because that was what was easiest for me to do. There was nothing I ever wanted more in life to be an Army officer. It's why I signed up, volunteered, and I had gone to Israel when I was 16, and I saw the Israeli Army. And people serve because they love their country, and we serve because we protect the Constitution. We go where politicians send us. Some people like Barbara Lee were right, some people were wrong, but it doesn't. Either way, we did our mission. And when the war for me really started the moment I came home. And I sort of had to realize that I was the guy that went to die for weapons that weren't there. Even though I believed in the war, I went on stop loss, which meant even though my time was up, I still went. And I know you always hear about the guy on the street, but sometimes you realize you're that guy. 90% of our Army was in Iraq, so we can't project force anywhere. My unit was extended. I had left already, but that happened so much. I was in Iraq my first night, and that's how long it took to get in combat. And it was about 2 weeks after the president stood up and said, "Mission accomplished." And I know I had a little incident with Melanie Morgan on the NewsHour. She doesn't like me a whole lot, but when she talks about the things that politicians say, there was nothing worse for us in Iraq than to be fighting insurgents every day and to hear my commander-in-chief, a draft dodger from Vietnam, and bring it on. And that's so easy to say when your kids are hanging out in Argentina. So, you know, when I came home, you process all these revelations, and you know, I even went to the VA. It was very hard for me. I didn't sleep right, and it was very difficult when you go to the Veterans Hospital, where I went to Pittsburgh, and you find out that George Bush is going to close 8 veterans hospitals in the country, including the ones you went to. And people ask me, you know, well, what is Vote Vets and how did it get here? And you know, it starts with that story from everybody, and now we've got 40,000 people that have signed up online. And we wanted to be a bridge for veterans to get involved in politics, because they haven't been running for state senate, they've been all fighting for America. And you know, obviously now we work in the coalition extensively since the post-election. And you know, I actually talk about terms about deploying out of Iraq. I actually talk in terms of I actually want to kill Osama bin Laden, and we've gotten away from that in this country. With 90% of our army in Iraq, bin Laden is eating lamb chops in Afghanistan.
I know. Bravo!
Some of us here, I think the progressive we have to make a commitment, you know, that this is the group that will protect this country. And that's really what we stand for. I wanted to show you guys real quick the ad so you can sort of see what we do. I know that, you know, some people say I hit hard, but we read Sun Tzu in the Army, and what is the supreme importance of war is to attack the enemy's strategy. And Vote Vets, we go to your district and we hold you accountable when you vote against the troops, and you vote against the military, and you vote for policies that embolden the enemy. When George Bush stands up and says that we're going to be in Iraq for 50 years, he has just handed Al-Qaeda a recruiting poster. Every day we're in Iraq. The villages, no, we're not here for your oil. And then our president stands up and says we're going to be there for 50 years. Thank you, George Bush. Thank you for helping the enemy. Thank you for emboldening Iran. And we talk in those terms. You right? Oh, what's wrong? No, I don't. See, I don't do that. Hold on. While you're up here, hit play. Go ahead. This is our first commotion. Do I have to hit enter? What do we do?
This is an AK-47, the rifle of choice for terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is a vest left over from the Vietnam War. It's the protection we were given when we deployed to Iraq. This is modern body armor, made for today's weapons. The difference is life or death. Senator George Allen voted against giving our troops this. Now it's time for us to vote against it. Senator John Kyle voted against giving our troops this. Now it's time for us to vote against it.
When we ran that first ad, hold on, how do we get out of this now? I don't do computers. Control-Alt-Delete. Yeah. So we ran that one ad, and then all of a sudden we started running everywhere else, because it was actually the small donors that had given us so much money online that it was very easy for us to continue to run those ads in all those different states. And you know, everybody came after me. Fact Check came after me, and I thought that was so funny because Media Matters backed us up. And yeah, cheers to Media Matters. But they said Mary Landrieu had in her press release that they had SAPI plates in the press release that it was for. Fact Check, for some reason, didn't understand that SAPI plates are the plates you put inside the body armor. Now, obviously, they haven't been in the military, but we had to check Fact Check. But Media Matters helped us out on that. And you know when people start attacking your ads, that you're making a difference. Yeah, see, we don't do computers, guys. This is a mess. This is like... Yeah, let's go. This was probably actually poll testing our most effective approach. Just showing you. Just
Trusted that the politicians could send me would watch mine. Then I get home, and I find out that Republican Congressman John Sweeney voted to increase his pay while voting to cut health care benefits for veterans like me. That may make sense from where he sits in Congress, but not from where I'm sitting.
VoteBets is responsible for the content of its advertising.
We ran that ad in 3 districts that I think when the press wanted to cover originally said weren't competitive districts, but we ran it against Gil Dudnik, John Sweeney, and Melissa Hart. The last week of the election, 1,000.5s, all 3 lost.
Osama bin Laden is still a threat.
Because of Iraq, our military is spread too thin.
Because of Iraq, there are more terrorists in the world.
Because of Iraq, America is less secure.
But because we live in America, we do have a plan. We can fix our course in Iraq and find a much better way to keep America safe. Saying these things out loud is patriotic. America, please, support our troops. Don't be silent now.
Because of Iraq. Because of Iraq, Osama bin Laden is still a threat.
Because of Iraq, our military is spread too thin.
Because of Iraq, there are more terrorists in the world.
Because of Iraq, America is less secure. So if you see commercials telling you to be afraid of terrorism, remember, it's because of Iraq.
To put that bin Laden ad back in there, General Clark called me up one morning. We were filming the other ad. He was just livid that the Republicans are using a bin Laden ad to try to scare people. And I mean, Osama bin Laden is, I mean, the guy's on the loose. I mean, he's the guy who attacked this country. So I'm gonna flush that right back down the toilet every time on him. And then because that's how we got to fight. That's our theory of saving. So let's go.
When it comes to Iraq, America's divided.
On one hand, you've got 2/3 of the American people.
A bipartisan majority in Congress, the Iraq Study Group.
And veterans like us, all opposed to the escalation.
On the other hand, there's George Bush, who supports escalation. If you support escalation, you don't support the troops. Join the troops.
Stop the escalation.
John, that ad ran during the Super Bowl in Maine, Minnesota, and in Washington, D.C.
This is our last one, and I think obviously the most recent. But we've been able to go out and recruit the actual generals who served in Iraq to challenge this administration on the war. Let's start with General Matzzie. This is the commander of the 1st Infantry Division.
I have always said that I will listen to the requests of our commanders on the ground.
Mr. President, you did not listen. You continue to pursue a failed strategy that is breaking our great Army and Marine Corps. I left the Army in protest in order to speak out. Mr. President, you have placed our nation in peril. Our only hope is that Congress will act now to protect our fighting men and women.
CBS. You know, General Matzzie is happy not to be with CBS anymore, so he can talk up about the war in Iraq. So, you want to show General Wheaton real quick?
The backstory on that is that General Matzzie lost his...
President Bush says he listens to his military commanders. Well, Mr. President, I was one of those commanders, and you weren't listening when we warned you of the dangers we'd face invading Iraq. Now our military is overcommitted, and America is less secure. Mr. President, you're being told we need serious diplomacy, not escalation, and you're still not listening. If the President won't listen, Congress must.
Marines were ambushed, men were being hit. My artillery unit was holding off the enemy, but we were running out of ammunition. I kept calling for helicopters to resupply us, but the helicopters never came. Where were the helicopters?
The helicopters, the equipment, and the troops are stuck fighting George Bush's war in Iraq. Congress has to help get the strategy right so we can fight the terrorists who are the real threat to America.
We like to take their strategy and their talking point, and we like to push right back. And that's because we're soldiers. It takes a lot for these generals to speak up. I have to tell you, you don't actually ever want to question a war you fought in. That's a hard thing for anybody to go through. I mean, you believed in your country and your leadership. And you know, my friends in Iraq right now said to me, "Hey, John, we just want to know when Congress is going to get us out of here, because the president has no idea what's going on. He cares more about a political policy than he does about their lives, and they know that. And it's been devastating. And people ask, how do you get these veterans to speak up? And I'll leave you with this story. Because for us, it's personal. See, when you come home, you still think you're a 26-year-old American. But you're not. See, you're not. And no one your age understands that. And one day I go around and I talk at all these events, and I say, you know, I'm the guy that got screwed. And this guy, he comes up to me, he came up to me and said, "Hey, John, I want to shake your hand." I said, "Well, why do you want to shake my hand?" And he says, "Because you're an Iraq War veteran." And I said, "Are you a veteran?" And he said, "Yes, I'm a veteran." I said, "Well, I want to shake your hand." I said, "Where did you serve?" He says, "I served in World War II in the Pacific." And I said, "Well, I want to shake your hand because you served in World War II in the Pacific." And he said, "Look," he looked at me and he said, "Hey, John, do you know what it means to be a veteran?" And I said, "I think I know what it means to be a veteran." And he says, "Let me tell you." He said, "When I was a little boy, I went to a parade, and I got to shake the hand of a Civil War veteran." And I said, "Wow, so I'm shaking the hand of a World War II veteran who shook the hand of a Civil War veteran." And he says, "You are." And he said, "But you know what that Civil War veteran told me?" And I said, "What's that?" He said, "When he was a little boy, he shook the hand of a Revolutionary War veteran." And I said, "Wow, so I'm shaking the hand of a Civil War veteran." He goes, "But you know what it means to be a veteran?" And I said, "What's that?" He says, "It means you got more in common with me, or more in common with the Revolutionary War veteran than you probably do that's anybody who's your own age." And that's an obligation that all these veterans and these ads feel together, is to bring their stories forward, whether or not we're helping them run for Congress or helping them change policy, because we say in the military, you know, don't ever leave a fallen comrade behind, and we can't leave those guys in Iraq without a strategy that works. We can't leave them out there hanging. So we come home, and much like you want to take back America, we weren't political. We were not with you 4 years ago, but we are with you today because you've helped us. Thank you.
That concludes the presentation part of our panel, but we still have time left. Actually, we have about 25 minutes left. And I thought we were going to do Q&A with pieces of paper and pencil, but they're telling me, no, that's not how we're doing Q&A. So I'm just going to call on people. Sir.
In as much as when there's a good case to be made for war ever being illegal in the first place, we were lied into the whole thing from the get-go, the Downing Street memos, everybody knows that. I'd like your opinion as a military man of Colonel Aaron Watada's stand, saying that he when he joined the armed forces, and he did serve a tour over there, but when he joined, he signed up for defending the Constitution. And that for him to continue and remain silent would be akin to what was called at the Nuremberg trials, when the Nazi officers knew that what they were doing was wrong, and they continued to do it. Well, what do you think about that?
Well, obviously, I think, Aaron Watanda deserves a tremendous amount of credit for having the courage to sign up for the military. I think, national service is something this country should really debate, because the country's done a lot for us. As for his current situation, obviously it's a courageous position to be in. He's willing to go to jail for his position, and I can respect that. I would have done it. If I was called back to Iraq tomorrow, I would go, because my obligation as an Army officer is to lead the soldiers in the military. They need my leadership, and I think what's very challenging now is that you have an Army, because of George Bush, that in some of the reserve units you only have 30% manpower, 20% manpower. And unfortunately, we need a strong military in this country. The best preservation we have for peace is the strength of our military for political leverage. And I respect his position, like I said, from a courageous standpoint. It's not something I would have done. If I was called back to Iraq tomorrow, I would serve, because I believe that my obligation is to lead the soldiers in the United States military.
All right, we're going to go around the room, and our friend from Acorn right here.
Louder, please.
I'll repeat the question. Go ahead.
One thing I would like to ask, since you were talking about all the places you went where they had closed the VA hospital, it bothers me very much. What are we going to do when we get these people home? I'm retired from the VA hospital, both groups, and remember I thought you saw, that I know what the soldiers in this problem is like, and I'm wondering, that's one thing we need to get together. What are we going to do with these soldiers when they come home?
I'm going to repeat the question. The question was, how do we help our soldiers when they come home? And I'm going to actually ask Congresswoman Barbara Lee to answer this question first, others then want to.
And thank you very much for your question. As a daughter of a veteran, my dad actually served in World War II and in Korea. And John, let me just thank you for your courage and for, John.
I told the congressman I thank you for being right.
Let me tell you, as a military person, standing out there and doing what you're doing is remarkable in terms of not only bringing the face of veterans to the what it is, but also fighting for veterans' benefits. And that's exactly what we all have a commitment and an obligation to do. Fortunately, in the House of Representatives this year, we've been able to increase the amount of veterans' benefits. And it's Congressman Bob Filner from San Diego, he's the chair of our Veterans Committee, also a member of the Progressive Caucus. But Speaker Nancy Pelosi, our leadership, this has been a focus, a very high priority for our Democratic leadership and for all of us. Let me mention a bill that we have introduced, H.R. 508, which we can talk about a little bit later, but that bill requires, and that's a bill introduced by Congresswoman Lynn Woolsey that really sets forth a plan on how to get out of Iraq. And the fully funded withdrawal is incorporated in 508. But in that, we include an increase for veterans' benefits in terms of health care and mental health, and we want it as an entitlement. We don't want it just as we honor our veterans. The best way that we can honor our veterans and make sure that the world knows we support them is, one, to bring them home and to take care of them when they're at home and do what we need to do to help them with their jobs and everything else that they're so
John, did you, because I know
look, I think that's the absolute great question. In Vietnam, my dad was talking to me yesterday on the front page of the Washington Post, and he was saying, 3,500 soldiers have died. In Vietnam, 58,000 have died. But in Vietnam, 1 out of every 3 soldiers that was wounded in combat died. And now we're only seeing 1 of 8. And now we've got deployments 12 months, not 15 for the Army. So the real hidden casualty here is the post-traumatic stress. And unfortunately, when you go to the doctor and you get a test for cancer or AIDS or anything else, there's like a blood test and a diagnosis. And what we have a tremendous problem is that this administration is too cheap to pay for the people they send to work. Now, they'll give you a tax cut if you're rich. But if you're a veteran and you fight for this country, you come home, they won't quantify you with PTSD. They'll call you adjustment disorder, personality disorder, and then you fall out of the system. And that's why we have homeless veterans. And so these progressive ideals that everybody feels are why we need to take care of our veterans and they get back. And actually, Speaker Pelosi deserves a tremendous amount of credit, and so does Congressman Filner, because even the American Legion just sent out a press release last week supporting their budget this year for the VA, because it's the first time in 12 years we've met the independent budget request on money. And that's because the Republicans are too cheap to pay for the troops. And this is a bread and butter issue for the Democrats. They have to push because the president is so cheap and try to veto the thing. And I can't lobby enough the Congresswoman to just push that stuff through, because the VA is underfunded. We have a diagnosis issue, and it's a tremendous problem.
Thank you, and I'm gonna try to square across the room. In the green shirt, the gentleman with the tie right here.
I was a key for the times.
Welcome home.
Also to Congresswoman Lee, I'm now a psychiatric nurse, and I work with a lot of psychiatric patients, and we talk about something which organization I hope will address and Congress will address. We talk about closed head injuries, and we talk about mental health care. Being a specialist in the area, those are two separate issues. Closed head injuries people tend to treat, unfortunately, as a psychiatric illness because of the behavioral components, and a lot of people from Vietnam got that confused. I'm afraid those from Iraq will have that confused, whereas people with closed head injuries, it's a neurological component. No one does the research or the funding to address those issues. I'm just wondering if there's any committees to look at that for the veterans, more people are suffering from that.
So there's brain injuries that are not psychological disorders, but are physical or neurological disorders. You're asking about that. So
yes, sir. I don't want to get them confused, and I would hope that both vets would also.
This is a great point. So post-traumatic stress in the 80s was diagnosed officially because of the lobbying that the Vietnam veterans had done. The traumatic brain injury is what the gentleman was talking about. It's this new hidden wound of this war. Every war you have new wounds, and really the new wound from this war is this traumatic brain injury. And look, when you're in combat in Iraq, the most likely way that you'll meet the enemy is on the road. These improvised explosive devices, and the explosions are tremendous. You'll always know if you come onto a fob and you'll see someone with their ears bleeding, you'll know that there was a roadside bomb. And what happens is that when the dust and the shrapnel, a lot of times it shoots up, it can cause head injuries, or people, they fall and they hit their heads. And months later, we find out they have this traumatic brain injury, which is an actual brain disorder. And it's I talked to Congressman Filner about it. It's an issue that I think, luckily, the Democratic Congress on the VA is going to look into, and they are aware of it. But quantifying these things and forcing an administration to quantify what TBI is for disability is a true challenge, like it will be for post-traumatic stress.
Thanks. I'm going to go, Stacy. Will you introduce yourself, please, too?
My name is Stacy Bannerman. I'm one of the original members of Military Families Speak Out. Louder. And I'm one of the original members of Military Families Speak Out. I believe the best way we can take care of our veterans is to quit making new ones. And as badly as our active duty vets have been and betrayed by this administration and the VA healthcare system, there's no question that's happened. Our National Guard and Reservists have been abandoned. And because they are significantly older, they tend to be mid-career, they've got wives and families, more so even than active duty members of the military. What's happening is it's destroying families and it's endangering communities. And what is going to be done to correct that? Thousands, tens of thousands of National Guard and Reservists have already timed out of the system because the VA delayed telling them they had PTSD until they've been home for over a year and a half, and it's too late for them. So now what?
I'm going to ask Congressman Lee if you wanted to, or John, John's an expert on all these topics.
I've spent time on both the active Army and the reserve component. And this might surprise you here, but if you're a U.S. Army reservist or a National Guardsman and you're not mobilized, but they can send you to the border of Mexico for immigration, that you actually don't have TRICARE. So you don't have guaranteed health care.
TRICARE is a military
health care proposal. So Guard and reservists have been treated like second-class citizens for a long, long time. Unfortunately, after Vietnam, we created a system where we could not deploy without the National Guard and Reserves. But their specialties were absolutely required for deployment. So every time there's a war, you will have National Guard and Reserves, yet their benefits are much less. The second issue is the most important issue she brought up, which is that there was George Bush likes to go on and says, I gave every veteran health care 2 years after they returned. Well, since you were in Texas during Vietnam, let me explain it to you. Your war never started, our war never ends. So it's true. So what happens is these guys come back, and for 2 years, when I walked into the VA, and it took me 8 months to walk in there and tell a nurse, I said to her, she goes, what's wrong with you? And I said, I don't know, but I'm not who I used to be. And she's like, well, you came to the right place. And because I went within the first 2 years of returning from war and being off active duty, not having health care, the VA gave me coverage. But after 2 years, you don't have that same access to those VA facilities unless you have a claim. So the bottom line is that if you're wounded in combat or you serve in Iraq or Afghanistan, you should always be able to walk into the VA for health care. But like I said, that's 50%.
And actually, that goes to a good idea the Congresswoman mentioned, which is to make veterans benefits an entitlement. Now, what that means is you make them have the force of law like Social Security or Medicare would, so that it would be the president couldn't tinker with them without an act of Congress, and that would be a tremendous step forward.
The National Guard is so vulnerable to this because the hardest thing for these individuals is they just spent 16 months preparing to go to Iraq, 12 months in Iraq, a month, and then they go back to their community. There's no military community there. There's no one who understands their experience, and they're literally a fish out of water. And it's even more difficult in the rural communities because there might not be a VA or a vet center close to them, and this is where their life falls apart. And it's just obviously a tremendous issue, and I think as much as you could advocate, and I should advocate it, it's a story that doesn't get told enough.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
We'll go in the striped shirt, gentlemen. Yep.
I noticed there's no mention of the permanent 80 football field square foot embassy that we're all building. In fact, some Democratic candidates that we're going to hear speak at this conference are not talking about leaving that giant embassy. And unlike every other embassy in the world, this one sits on a contested sea of oil, second largest. So it's not a regular embassy. And they know, the people that live there know that whenever that embassy leaves, they then fight for that power bank that's created for that resource, which is the second greatest on Earth. We're not talking about
What's your question?
The embassy. What is that? Nobody's mentioning the embassy, the Democratic.
Yeah, some of us are mentioning the embassy, and I think that embassy, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I don't want to see us fund any more of the embassy proposal. Bring that into part of our work to defund this embassy. This is billions of dollars.
If I could just say one word on that, I wholeheartedly agree. It makes no policy sense to have 1,000 personnel, the U.S. personnel, sitting behind glass walls and in the center of a country that is fragmenting. And in the plan that we have coming out, there are certain things that we need to do economically to help economic reconstruction and give credit to some of the development assistance workers, the NGOs who actually go out in the current context of Iraq. When you see this plan that comes out, we say, dismantle this embassy in the middle of Baghdad, but look for ways to create a presence that's supportive of reconciliation, that's supportive of economic reconstruction around the country. 1,000 people at the center of Baghdad makes no sense at all.
Yeah, I just look at the embassy as looks like it's an embassy of an empire. Exactly. It's a bad.
When you look at the embassy and the fact that the Bush administration wants to be there at least for 50 years, and that they're thumbing their nose at no permanent bases, which we have enacted, then we see what their design is for the region. I think the embassy is just a piece of it.
And it puts our troops at risk with the Iraqis. See that, I want to go over here in the green shirt, Harriet.
There are increasing saber rattlings and warnings of going to war against Iran. And the mainstream press isn't reporting that there's no evidence of nuclear weapons being developed over there or where they might be targeted. Although they're talking about surgical strikes, they don't know where to strike. American people aren't getting the whole story. We weren't able to get a resolution through the House on forcing the president to get authorization from Congress before attacking Iran. What's it going to take to mobilize the American people to let their representatives know that we don't want to do to Iran what we've done to Iraq?
I'm going to ask first our policy expert, then Brian Katulis, then anyone else wants to join that.
I think you raise a really important point, and I think in addition to opposing any military conflict with Iraq, you should propose what we need to do, which is something that the Bush administration half-heartedly has started to do, sit down with the Iranians and discuss these issues, because Iran is a country, like all countries neighboring Iraq, that have interests, and they are actually operating in certain ways to advance those interests. And they're doing things that actually I think are helpful in some cases, and in some cases that aren't helpful for the overall mission of helping Iraq stand on its own. And I think not sitting at the table, not having the courage and self-confidence to sit across the table from our rivals and adversaries is the missing link in all of this. I think you got to continue to press, and I think some journalists have picked this up. You saw over the weekend this faction that's inside the Bush administration that continues to look to war as the first option. And I think a war should always be the last option. And in this instance, it doesn't seem to make any policy sense at all to expand the conflict eastward to include Iran.
Yeah. Let me say one of the issues that we're addressing, and I hope this summer this can be part of our mobilization, is I've introduced a resolution we're building support that just says that no prior authorization to use force shall be adhered to, or constitute an authorization to use force against Iran, and that there shall be no military first strike against Iran. And that is very important. Very important policy that we need to rally around and have members of Congress co-sponsor. We can get the resolution number to you later if you're interested in it. But also an effort, we're mounting an effort, and we have for the last several years since the Bush administration has been in disavowing the doctrine of preemptive strikes.
Yeah, right.
That should not be
And clean up the information for those.
Both vets has had a whole project on Iran. John, what can you talk about?
Sure. I would tell everyone here to go to www.stopiranwar.com and sign our petition. We have been pushing this with General Clark. This is his big issue. Look, I think Iran with a nuclear weapon is a horrible problem. Unfortunately, people are going about this in the absolute worst way. I just want to explain how bad the situation is in Iraq with Iran and the influence they have there. You have 130,000 American troops in Iraq. We can barely hold the glue together. Iran has invested in Iraq for two major militias. If we were to strike Iran, it would be like throwing a firecracker into an oven inside of Iraq. For a situation that we can't control, because we can't ever insert ground troops into Iran. We can't force regime change. Your military is leverage for political negotiation. We have no military leverage with Iran right now because George W. Bush is the worst commander-in-chief in the history of the United States. What you would do if you struck Iran with just air assets, which is why you have an admiral in charge of CENTCOM, and you have an admiral in charge of the Joint Chiefs, which is why you have carrier groups moving to the region, and why you have Patriot missiles, which are needed to respond to Shihab-3 Iranian missiles. What you would do is you would create a larger war inside of Iraq with American troops stuck in the middle, and I say this for Joe Lieberman, you would cause Israel to be attacked by Hezbollah. So you're creating regional insecurity because you don't have the courage to do negotiation.
Website stopiranwar.com. Thank you, John. Right here.
This is more of a policy question, and I would suggest to John that the government's not too, the president's not too cheap for Republicans. They're too damn greedy.
That's a good statement. I might use that.
In the sense that, you look at the trifold, the way the British divided up Iraq with Kurdish, Shiite, and so forth, and you had that three-partition. What would be the expedition solution to that? And why don't we have a Marshall-type plan for the Middle East? When we look at the Hezbollah, we look at Lebanon, we look at Israel's destruction of Lebanon, and no rebuilding of those countries. And so, there's no economic security anywhere. And now the Palestine, particularly in the West Bank, is in such chaos. I see no long-term strategy or policy that's going to extradite us from the region and create any kind of security that we can count on as Americans. Would you address
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. First, on the issue of not having a Marshall Plan, I think we've had a lot of rhetoric. If you look at President Bush's second inaugural speech, there's a lot of things in there that I like. Freedom and democracy and the promotion of these ideals. But the problem is actions speak a lot louder than words. And the implementation of this strategy, which I think was high on ideals, but just like the policy in Iraq, there was nothing there when you looked at it. When you looked at the needed support for the Palestinian people and the economic support that was needed to make their lives a little bit better, again, a lot of talk, but not enough delivery and not sufficient action at all. And on your first question, remind me again?
About the partition.
The partition, I actually think, and I don't know where people are, I think it is not the place of the United States of America to decide these issues. What we might be able to do, and I say might because our credibility actually has declined so much in the region, what we might be able to do is to help facilitate a process by which Iraq's leaders decide these questions, I think, themselves peacefully. I think what you're seeing right now is the collapse of an old order that was established after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, after World War I, that was held together by dictatorships, by some form of neo-imperialism by the British and by the US. And you're seeing that happen, and it's a devastating kind of collapse. And what we need to do is to manage that. We shouldn't, in my view, and this is my own view, we shouldn't say this is what the state should look like, the three-state solution and things like this. Iraqis themselves need to make those decisions, and the best thing we can do is work with the international community.
Gentleman on the end here in the orange shirt.
I want to first thank Brian very much for making the point that everything we give to that non-government government and its army and police force is money badly spent. This is not something that's ever going to work and has no credibility, and that's made too rarely. But I wanted to ask John, your ads address what we need to get out there between now and September so that whatever Democrats and Republicans fear, we're told they fear being accused of not supporting the troops. We all know that Bush doesn't support the troops. Can we use those ads? Are they publicly made?
Well, I want to tell you, this is, let me give you the vote for a second with vote because this is so important. To get that body armor out in the air, I put it on my credit card first. Second, I went and I found 6 people to give me $5,000. It was a $30,000 buy. I ran in Virginia. Webb's people went crazy about it. Next thing I know, Keith Olbermann, my man. Keith Olbermann put it on countdown and Winter played it. Next thing I knew, we have this thing called YouTube and like 200,000 people watched it online. And people started donating in small money. And the Washington Post was following me around when we were lobbying congressmen. And they wrote this whole piece on how I say these things that aren't senatorial. Like, you can stand with the troops with the draft dodgers down the road. And what was funny is when they went and asked John McCain, he said, well, this is just a little group of veterans. But when they went and looked at the campaign finance filings on the PAC, $1.2 million to come into the PAC, but mostly it was $50, $100 donations from people in this room. So y'all empower us. That's why we like to talk. That's why we work so close to Move On. It's because maybe we are different on X, Y, and Z issue, but from a model on how to create a political organization, Move On is the model. And y'all are the muscle that really empower us more than large companies. Just go on YouTube and pass them around. They're there. But let me tell you what.
We have them in public on public access television stations.
We could talk about that. But I just want to let you know that every time you use an ad, you got to buy the airtime. So that's just an issue of getting the money on the ad.
And we're trying to raise actually $5 million for TV. So if you can help out. The lady right here, yeah.
What about Blackwater?
Holland, Michigan, was a Navy SEAL and he started his military, the mercenary, the privatization. And as Jan Sierkowski said on television, we don't know if they're 30,000 or 40,000 over there. Apparently, I just finished 100,000. I just finished reading the book by Jeremy Scagle and it's a must read.
This is a big problem for our country. And let me tell you what. When I was in Kosovo, we had shrunk the size of the military, and these contractors worked well for us in operations other than war. Okay, in Kosovo, per se, they ran the base and they gave the chow. cleaned out the porta potties, but Iraq is a war zone. And so when you're in war, you carry a Geneva Convention card. Some of us in the military, those of us in the, we actually still believe in Geneva Convention, even though it's a bit what happens is, we have these soldiers, and in the military, we enforce standards and discipline. And what happens is you have these contractors that are running around, and they're not beholden to the same standards as we are. So we have chaos. I mean, I'll never forget the day I came, they came back from the Baghdad airport down to Dogwood. And I said, hey, where's the mail today? They said, it didn't come. I said, well, why not? They said, oh, Brian and Ruth didn't want to deliver it. Someone got killed. You know, these guys just pick and choose when they want to be involved and not involved. Then they run around with a private military with no standards. And we have an issue for the morality of our military. It empowers our military when we support the Geneva Convention. That is why people surrendered to us in the first Gulf War. It helps us on the battlefield. It's a force multiplier. So when we have issues like Blackwater, we need to get rid of that, because when the USS Cole was attacked, they said it was a terrorist attack because they didn't represent a uniformed military. If you don't represent a uniformed part of the armed forces of the United States, then you don't belong serving our country in war. That's period. In the front row here.
Yes, I have a nephew who has served 3 tours in Iraq. He's a Marine captain and a Cobra helicopter pilot. And he was outraged. He read the 9/11 Commission report, and he was outraged that the most junior person interviewed was Lieutenant Colonel. And they never left the Green Zone to do their study of Iraq. And I'm wondering why the House and Senate haven't had hearings with people who are captains and lieutenants and lower down, who actually know what's going on in the war. I mean, my nephew thinks George Bush should be tried for treason. One of the most kind of disturbing things to hear are his colleagues, officers in the Marine Corps, all agreeing that their commander-in-chief should be tried for treason. What's happening to this country when the soldiers wanted, and the Marine officers want the commander-in-chief tried for treason? I mean, it's
You mean the tragedy being that the commander-in-chief is that bad? Yes. But the soldiers are independent thinkers. That's a good thing, yeah. And you're referring to the Iraq Study Group report, not 9/11.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant the Iraq Study.
Congresswoman, there was a question there about Congress and hearings.
Why don't they have hearings where people have actually been on the ground?
I think that's a very good idea. Yeah.
But you have to protect their identity as my son.
Sure, I understand, and I will definitely communicate that back to the appropriate community. We have been conducting many hearings. Congressman Waxman has, Congressman Conyers. The appropriate oversight committees have been working diligently on here, but I hear you loud and clear. I think you're absolutely correct. We need to have some new sets of hearings that bring in individuals who've been on the front lines, because they know more than most what's going on.
We haven't had a lot of luck with the vets, but as Tom knows, with the coalition, and we actually deliver them to the congressman's offices. So we actually do a lot of visits with them.
And back home in their districts.
In their districts.
Yeah. Where you can hold a press conference after you try to get to the meeting.
That's right. And they won't see us.
Yeah. And they won't meet with the vets. Yeah. All right, Eric, how are we doing on time? One more question? All right, one more question. There's a gentleman who's been waving at me with his hand in the back.
All right, the phrase I want to introduce to you is perverse confluence of interests. Osama bin Laden on September 12th, 2001, if you were to say to him, what kind of policy should America adopt? Whatever he wrote on that piece of paper, I bet would be pretty much what George Bush did. Now, you take Blackwater and the whole of the military-industrial complex. You ask them that same question, it'll be the same thing George Bush did. What that means is that the money, the perversity of money in the military-industrial complex and the perversity of the hatred of Osama bin Laden, for various reasons, coincides with the policies of George Bush. Am I crazy? This is the truth. We got to get that out to the people.
Okay, so
that's not a question.
That wasn't a question. I am going to we have one question right here with the red and black shirt.
My repeat it, okay? Since we are, ideally, at some point, we will see a complete withdrawal from a very volatile region. Seeing as now, several decades later, we are still hearing that it was our fault that we left Vietnam. Let's say we withdraw, and unfortunately, there was from a very volatile region, and there's some bad things that happen, whatever it may be. What is the anti-war movement going to do to not take the blame for somebody else in this thing?
I'll actually take the answer to that question. What we're going to do is we're going to beat them. No, I'm sorry. The question was, what are we going to do to make sure we don't get blamed for the war, essentially, blamed for exiting too fast or whatever happens next? And the answer is very simple. Iraq is a disaster. We all know it's a disaster. We have to beat them, right? We have to beat them politically. We have to beat them on the messaging. We have to beat them on the substance. That means we have to work hard, right? And it means we have to put forward our own vision for what has to happen next, the after Iraq sort of policy. And it means we have to, we have to fight hard and win. That's what it means. That's the only answer to it. There are all sorts of, ways we can try to be smart, but that's going to be part of the beating them. We have to.
Tom, can I say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
All of the things that people say will come to pass if we leave Iraq are happening right now. All of the ethnic cleansing, all of the people pushed out of their homes, and this is hardly an excuse because yes, there'll be greater risks, but we can manage those risks if we have a sharper strategy, if we actually have a different approach to the region. And this is in Control Alt Delete, this new report we're going to put out. There is a way. I think there is a way actually to work with actors in the region to mitigate, to lessen the risks of our getting out. Because the main point here is the risks of just simply staying are a hell of a lot higher than the risks of leaving. And we've got to leave. We've got to leave.
First of all, let me just say one thing. This is an occupation and a civil war. The United States of America cannot win an occupation, nor can we win a civil war. As long as our troops are there, they are in harm's way, and it becomes no win, and it's going to get worse. And so we have to do something, and we must do it quickly, because I agree. We have to do help in terms of the reconstruction and development assistance, everything we need to do with a diplomatic effort after we're out of there. But we certainly can't stay there because it's just going to get worse. And that's what we must recognize and understand and not let them try to blame us for leaving a situation that's getting worse, where I always say we're digging ourselves deeper in a hole, and that's not how you get out of the occupation.
Everybody in this room supports the military and supports the troops. And that is extremely important as we go and challenge the war. We have to, and so I think that that's very different from Vietnam right now. There's never a perception that anybody in this room doesn't support the men and women who fight for us. And we have to hold that ground. That ground cannot go away. Some of those ads we ran were, yeah, I was questioning George Allen's patriotism. Absolutely. I hope he had fun in law school. So as long as you hold that ground, I think that you're okay. And the other issue with Lyndon Johnson, he was a Democrat. And we don't have any Democrats that were the commanders-in-chiefs during this war. So when Dwight Eisenhower ran for president, he ran as an anti-war Republican. And some of it's going to depend on the policy after this happens. And there's going to be one party that's empowered Al-Qaeda, like the Republicans, and there's going to be another party, like the Democrats, that defeats Al-Qaeda. And I think that's what this war's about, and that's what people need to focus on.
And that's all for the questions. I want to thank all of our panelists.